It was the 10th of January 1940. The world had already seen war when Germany invaded Poland in September of the previous year. This time, however, 2 German soldiers, not hundreds of thousands, would be responsible for an egregious blunder that saw top-secret German military documents about the upcoming invasion of the Low Countries handed over to the Belgian authorities. This would later on be called the Mechelen incident. In January 1940, the phony war was in full effect and there were little to no doings on the Western Front. Poland had fallen in October of 1939 and received virtually no help from her allies, France and Great Britain, and the world was wondering where the German Chancellor Adolf Hitler would turn next. The next potentially major hostile move was not, however, caused by a high-ranking German officer, but by these 2 men, German aviator Major Erich Hohenmanns and Major Helmut Rheinberger. Hohenmanns was a 52-year-old veteran of World War I who was denied a combat role in the new conflict because of a mild cardiac condition. He was instead given command of the airbase at Lodenheide, and on the morning of the 10th of January 1940, he had been flying a Messerschmitt Bf 108 Typhoon, an aircraft used for reconnaissance liaison and other roles, from Lodenheide to Cologne when he lost his way. Extensive low fog banks blocked his view of the surrounding area, and in his desperation he headed west in the hopes of finding the River Rhine and getting his bearings straight so he could find his way back to Cologne, not knowing that he had already crossed the frozen and unidentifiable river and left it behind. But why was this such a major problem? The answer is simple. If Hohenmanns had been flying alone, nothing noteworthy would have probably happened to him other than being interned for landing in a neutral country without authorization. In this instance, there was a second person on board, Major Helmut Rheinberger, who was tasked with coordinating the logistical support for a flight unit that would deploy German paratroopers behind Belgian lines on the day of the impending assault. Rheinberger was traveling to Cologne to attend a staff meeting, and on the day before the flight, Hohenmanns and Rheinberger had a conversation in which the flight commander offered to transport him to the mutual destination by air, which the major accepted. Hohenmanns was however unaware that Rheinberger would be carrying materials pertaining to the upcoming German invasion of Belgium and the Netherlands that was supposed to take place on the 17th of January. A side note to this should be that the major knew that transporting confidential documents via aircraft without explicit authorization was strictly prohibited and considered a capital offense, but he decided to fly anyways because of the train delays and tie-ups which were now frequent because of the movement of German troops and supplies to the Western Front. The pair both ultimately boarded the plane and departed for Cologne on the 10th of January. Later on in the day, having been lost in the sky, Hohenmanns unintentionally pulled a lever within the cockpit, cutting off the gasoline flow to the engine, and afterward performed an emergency landing in a nearby field. And with the plane sustaining serious damage, it was now impossible for the two to return to Germany. The pair did not initially realize where they were, and once a nearby farmer spoke to them in French and pointed to the Meuse River, Rheinberger realized they crossed into Belgium. This is when Hohenmanns realized that Rheinberger was carrying sensitive military information, as the major went into full panic mode and raced back to the plane, saying that he had secret documents he needed to destroy. In the midst of his attempts to burn the documents, 2 bicycle-riding Belgian border guards, Sergeant Franz Habitz and Corporal Gerard Rubens arrived, and Rubens raced to the plane once he noticed the smoke. Fragments of the documents were preserved from the fire, and the 2 Germans were brought into custody. The 2 Germans were brought to a Belgian border guardhouse, where they again tried to burn the rest of the documents, with Hohenmanns providing a diversion by asking the Belgians to use the restroom. This attempt, however, was unsuccessful, and after a few hours, agents from the Belgian intelligence service arrived and presented the documents to their superiors later that afternoon. Reports from the press of a downed German plane brought the tragic news to Berlin on the evening of January 10th. The news in turn created widespread concern in the German high command, where it was quickly determined that Rheinberger must have been carrying documents outlining portions of the invasion strategy. General Helmut Felmy, the commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, and Felmy's chief of staff, Colonel Josef Kammhuber, were both fired by an irate Hitler on January 11th. Despite this setback, the decision was made to carry out the attack according to the original plan, though measures were taken to see if their plan had been fatally compromised. Field Marshal Alfred Jodel's diary contains a brief note about this incident that was written on January 12th. Quote, "If the enemy is in possession of all the files, situation is catastrophic." End quote. The reaction of the Allied countries ranged from taking the captured plans as de facto certainty that the Germans would invade on the indicated date, to believing that the plans were completely false and just a German deception tactic. King Leopold III of Belgium made the decision to notify both the French Supreme Commander, Maurice Gamelin, his own Minister of Defense, General Henry Denis, and the commander of the British Expeditionary Force. Furthermore, Leopold personally called Princess Juliana of the Netherlands and Grand Duchess Charlotte of Luxembourg, warning the former to "be careful, the weather is dangerous," and the latter to "beware of the flu," two prearranged code phrases indicating the Belgians believed the German attack was imminent. The French reaction was somewhat different. Maurice Gamelin, the commander-in-chief of the French army, considered it a great opportunity to bring Belgium and the Netherlands into the fold of the Allies, with their neutrality being an obstacle beforehand. With them on the side of the Allies, the French and the British could not only dig in on Belgium and Dutch territory, but could launch a decisive offensive as well. The Belgian cabinet was ultimately unable to reach a consensus over letting the French and the British into their country for defensive military precautions, and the German invasion that was expected to happen on the 14th of January never materialized. German Field Marshal Alfred Jodl postponed the original invasion plans to either January 15th or 16th depending on the situation, following the unexpected announcement that the Belgian and Dutch forces who were mobilized in 1939 had been placed on high alert. In the end, due to some heavy snowfall on January 15th and the gloomy weather forecast, Jodl recommended that Hitler postpone the invasion indefinitely, which the Führer did with some hesitation on January 16th. While in the short term, no to little damage seems to have been done, it's very clear that both France and the Low Countries suffered greatly as a result of these events in the long run. By the time the actual invasion happened on May 10, 1940, the Germans had a completely new and rethought concept to their invasion approach, which in turn led to the quick fall of France. We can now only theorize what would have happened if the original plans had been followed, and if and how much success the Germans would have had. The new idea for the attack was found in the proposal of General Erich von Manstein, the former chief of staff of the Germany Army Group A, who had been advocating for a new idea for several months. Hitler spoke with Manstein and agreed that the German panzer forces should be concentrated further south at Sedan, where they would not be expected. In the end, one could argue that the weather played a larger part in the postponements of the original plans than the documents that were revealed. In any case, Maurice Gamelin was criticized for not changing his original strategy, as he found it highly unlikely that the German High Command would use unconventional tactics, much less the new strategy that would be called Blitzkrieg. As for Erich Hohenmanns and Helmut Rheinberger, they were tried in absentia and found guilty and given the death penalty, though the verdicts would never be executed, as both men were evacuated in 1940, first to Britain and later to Canada. When they were finally returned to Germany as a part of a prisoner of war exchange in 1943, Rheinberger was found guilty and Hohenmanns received a partial pardon.